The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories.
Conspiracy theories.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy.
Because it is not the government of the people any longer. Most people do not understand the Illuminati.
A new world order. A world where the rule of law governs the conduct of nations.
Conspiracy theories.
It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations.
A new world order.
Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised.
It's the Weekend Vigilante Show.
No.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to the Vigilante program. I'm your host, Sheila Zilinsky, joined by my co-host, the one, the only, the thorn in Al Gore's side, renowned climatologist Dr. Timothy Ball. The call-in number to our studio is 347-324-3704. And if we have time towards the end of the program, we may take some calls from our audience. But anyway, we have a very special treat for our listeners. Our guest today is no stranger to taking on the big dogs, former BC Premier, the man who killed the HST, and has been tackling the smart meters, Bill Vander Zalm. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you, Sheila.
So, Bill, today we're not talking about running the province, and although we do want to touch on that dreaded thorn in our side, the HST, and your work on the smart meters later in the program, we want to talk about another cause you've taken an interest in, and that is chemtrails. So talk a little bit here about what got you interested in chemtrails, Bill.
Well, for me, all of the issues you mentioned sort of tie one to another. They're tied together because it's the same sort of thing in many, many respects. I was in politics for 25 years, most at the local level, where I enjoyed it thoroughly because you're close to the people, and it's not a party thing, so probably a lot more honest and a lot better than what it is when you get higher up.
Right.
I was very high up as you can go in the province for 5 years as Premier of BC, and I learned that really the politicians, for the most part, have little, if any, control. It's the big bureaucracy that's still there when the politicians come and go that basically decides, sets the tone, sets the direction, and moves on the big things. And, of course, they're influenced by the elite because they listen to the elite a lot more than what they would to the average guy on the street. And I wanted to get out of politics, which I did, because I realized, too, that unless you play the game, you can be removed fairly quickly. There's ways that it can be done. So I got out of politics, and I did get involved in issues, however. When, for example, there was all of the talk about privatizing BC Hydro, I mounted a bit of a movement and certainly got involved with a lot of people to fight the privatization of BC Hydro, which is a provincial utility that serves us and has served us well. Not as well now as what it used to, but anyway, that's another story. And I did get involved when the government decided that we couldn't build ferries here. We had to go to Germany to get them built. I protested that. I'm a free enterpriser. I'm seen by most people to be rather conservative, but I think I'm more a populist than one that carries a particular label. Contrails, chemtrails, we're near the airport, living in Ladner, close to Vancouver, so we see contrails all of the time. But then people started to point out to me that, hey, there's trails there that are a little different from the contrails. So I began to watch more closely, and particularly my wife Lillian watched it very closely, and we both became very convinced that there's something else happening up above us in the sky near Vancouver.
Right.
And we watched it. And then when we were in Palm Springs during the winter, again near an airport, we saw the same thing happening. These were not contrails. You'd have to be blind, stubborn, and dumb to realize that it's not contrails. Contrails, we've seen those for years. They've never changed. They disappear very quickly. They carry on a little bit behind the plane, and then they're gone. They last seconds, maybe occasionally a minute, but that's it. However, what we were seeing now were trails that came out and went from horizon to horizon, and they didn't dissipate, they expanded. Looking up at the sky, it appeared maybe they were 25, 30 feet, but then you realize because they're high up, it's probably more like 200 feet, and they keep spreading. And there's a lot of them, and oftentimes they cross one another, and the sky becomes cloudy. So there's something there. We realized it. We didn't know what it was, exactly what they were doing, who was doing it. So I decided finally, took me some time to do it too. I guess I'm a little bit like too many people. You tend to be too busy and you say, I've got other things to do, so you kind of pass it off, or you move on and do whatever else you need to do, and you pay not enough attention to what's happening at the initiative of government or somebody like that.
Right.
So finally, I decided I've got to do something here. I'm going to send a Freedom of Information request to both the federal government and the provincial government, because both the provincial government and the federal government must know what it is. You can't go up there and spray something in the sky or do something in the sky or move in the sky, for that matter, without getting permission through the governments. So they have to know what's happening. So I made this request of both the provincial and the federal government to advise me what information they have within government or within any of their ministries about climate control programs, because that's what I guessed it to be, and that's what most people think it to be if they're looking at this and analyzing it a little more carefully than just a glance. So I asked for this information. Both departments with government have been good in responding to say that they're passing it on to the appropriate ministries. I'll hear further. So, something's happening there. I also I didn't want to send out my request, which is rather lengthy and explains what it is I've seen and why it is I'm asking them for the information. I didn't pass that on to the media, because if you pass it on to the media, if I passed it on to the media, I would become the immediate target. They would say, Bill Vander Zalm's crazy, what's he doing, and what a nutty thing, how can he possibly think this is what he says it to be, and so forth. So I didn't want to become the target. I want Chem Trails to become the target.
Right.
So I passed it on to every municipality, city, and regional district in our province with a request that they pass a resolution to say that no particulate matter for climate control be sprayed in the atmosphere above their jurisdiction without informed consent. Now, I know, having been at the local level in government, having been a councillor and a mayor, that's pretty hard for some council member or a mayor or a council to say, we're not going to do this. This is crazy, because it's not an unreasonable request. Who in their jurisdiction wouldn't want the council to say that no particulate matter be sprayed in their atmosphere above them without having some knowledge of what it is and getting consent? So all the municipalities have it now, and I've received confirmation from a number of them saying that it will go before their councils. I've also asked that they take it to the Union of BC Municipalities, which is having its meeting in Vancouver on September 19th and 20th.
Right.
So we'll get a lot of publicity, I guess, for the fight against chemtrails from those municipal councils, and that will then get to the media, the mainstream media, and hopefully they'll report that accurately.
So,
But
Bill,
anyway, that's how I became involved.
Okay, let me jump and ask you a quick question. Were you surprised when Environment Canada meteorologist David Jones, when he shocked us at those comments he gave to the Vancouver media that it's a waste of time to pursue these things? Did that shock you a bit?
No, it didn't shock me too much. It's sort of what I expect from the bureaucracy. They think they're above the politicians, above the people elected, above government. I guess in many respects they are, and that's part of the problem. And we see time and again, as we saw it in our province with the HST, which is a VAT tax, a value-added tax. They brought it in, they made their agreements with the federal government, they signed the documentation, and then they told the people what they were doing. So there was great opposition to the tax, obviously, because it's an unfair tax. It penalizes the guy that goes to work with the lunch bucket, but it gives a big benefit to the big corporations. So it's an unfair tax, and they did that without getting the people involved. I'm guessing big industry knew it was coming, but the people certainly didn't. And then they did it again with smart meters. They didn't come to the people and say, we're going to spend $1 billion of your dollars putting in smart meters. We don't know what the effect, but we're putting it in because it's good for you. And, again, same old stuff. And now it's happening, I think, with Chem Trails, but I have to confess, I don't know. I only know what I've been told about Chem Trails. So I know it's something up there, but just exactly what it is or who's initiating it, I can only guess.
Well,
I'm guessing it's happening in the NATO countries. So I'm thinking it's bigger than Canada and bigger than the USA, or bigger than Canada and the USA combined. It's possibly some agency like NATO or within NATO. But again, we should be told. We don't know. They're doing this and nobody's saying a thing. So hopefully my request from freedom of information will get the ball rolling.
Excellent. Well, the chemtrails have said, Bill, to consist of very harmful toxins, aluminum, barium, causing harm to human health, poisoning our water, killing the soil. We've got, these diseases like cancer, Alzheimer's, autism, bone diseases, you name it, at all-time highs. And people are actually now getting hair analysis in both North American and other European countries, and they're finding out, Bill, that aluminum levels in their bodies are off the charts at dangerous levels. And these are people who are eating organic. They don't live even near industry. Whether it's aluminum or barium or other compounds, do you personally think that we're being used as a guinea pig for some kind of chemical experiment here?
I agree with everything you say, and I agree it's dangerous for the people, it's dangerous for the soil, it's dangerous for the whole of the environment. I agree with all of that. I don't think it's so much an experiment. I think it's more a plan, and what the purpose of it, I don't know. I guess, once again, we're all thinking it's climate control. They're hoping to sort of shut out some of the sunlight, but yeah, is it that or is it something else or just exactly what is it? We don't know. Exactly, we don't know.
Well, Tim is going to weigh in on this, Tim, because we're told all the time, Al and Tim, that global warming, now conveniently called climate change, is a threat to agriculture, and therefore it's an issue of national security. So as a national security issue, whatever they do to combat climate change, that can be kept out of the public domain. I want you both to weigh in on this, but I also, Tim, want you to talk a little bit about, geoengineering is what this is touch on a few of the experiments gone wrong, such as the metal filings in the Pacific Ocean, etc.
Well, just a general comment that Bill's very common sense observations and his experience from dealing with governments and bureaucracies are very, very, very helpful. Of course, there's a question that we want to ask maybe towards the end of how do you control bureaucracies? Because they know they can outweight the politician, as Bill inferred. And Mary McCarthy's comment that bureaucracy is the rule of no one, it's the modern form of despotism. And we see in the climate change issue, where they set up the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they did it through the World Meteorological Organization, which meant then that they had control of the bureaucrats, the weather bureaucrats in every country in the world. Environment Canada was a leading player in that. So I think that's a very, very important problem. But the other thing I wanted to sort out with Bill here is and I think he's very aware. His comments are very well stated, because if you make a mistake or say something that's wrong, that will then become the focus. They will say, well, you got this wrong, and they'll throw the baby out with the bathwater, and they'll say, well, these people don't know what they're talking about, and so this is the game that's played, as Bill knows very well. You distract and you divert. A couple of things. One is, we do know that the U.S. government was spraying the upper atmosphere. And, of course, that's the question I would ask. You're asking the federal government of Canada, and you're asking BC government, but what jurisdiction and what say and have the federal government approved the U.S. flying over Canada and spraying these chemicals? And that's a very important part of it. I think that Bill hit on something when he said, well, this is NATO or some larger umbrella organization. And I can fill him in a little bit on how that works, because I was the operations officer at a squadron during the Cuban crisis, and we were put on 2-minute alert by an American admiral at Norfolk, Virginia. And the Canadian commander, Fred Carpenter, said, well, that admiral doesn't have jurisdiction over us. He's NORAD. And the American admiral took off his NORAD hat and put on his NATO hat and said, okay, you're on 2-minute alert. And this is the sort of thing that goes on all of the time. So this is the issue I want to look at. The difficulty with the Chem Trail thing is, of course, the government have created this false problem of human-caused global warming, that global warming is going to be the end of the world, and we've got to control it, and therefore it's the government's job to protect the people and so on. So it's kind of a perverse thing that the government create the problem, and then the government create the solution, which in fact then becomes the problem. And it raises this whole question about who identifies the problem. How sure are we of the problem? Well, in the One World Government Plan of Agenda 21, in Principle 15, they cover their bases with that by saying, we don't need any scientific evidence. If we think there's a threat to the planet, we got to deal with it. So forget the science, forget the facts, and just go ahead and do whatever you need to do. It's almost a carte blanche, which is frightening. A couple of things, Bill, I could add with regard to the contrails. We need to be very careful, and I got into this, 30 years ago. I used to take my students to places in Winnipeg that used climate data. One of them was I took them to the airport and had them briefed as if they were an Air Canada commercial pilot flying from Winnipeg to Vancouver. Discovered that on most of the flights, and it's true now of almost all commercial flights, they're actually able to fly higher because of better pressurization on the aircraft and because of more efficiency with the engines. They fly in the lower stratosphere, where the whole chemical condition and situation and temperature is very different than in what's called the troposphere. And it of course, for fuel savings and everything else. But here's the difference. When the exhaust comes out of the airplane in the stratosphere, it creates a very different set of conditions for the contrail or condensation trail, because now all of the gases and the water vapor particularly are immediately ice crystals, and therefore they don't dissipate as quickly. They reflect the sunlight quite differently. Their whole reaction to the sunlight is very, very different. The other thing is, of course, that particularly in Western Canada and over BC, we've got a tremendous increase of this high altitude traffic. Virtually all of traffic going out of North America crosses over BC on its way to Asia on the Great Circle routes, and so we're seeing an awful lot more of that. And so I'm not saying this is necessarily the answer, but what I'm saying is we need to know what we're looking at, what we're saying, and so there's two ends of it. We need to get the scientific answers, but we also need to get the political answers. And one of the things that I'd like to ask Bill is, and this is the difficulty. This came up with the IPCC on the global warming issue. When Environment Canada went to the politicians and said, global warming, we proved it. You've got to stop it. We've got to shut down CO2. We've got to eliminate CO2. We need alternate energies. The bureaucrats dictating policy. How does a politician deal with these bureaucrats? It's hard enough dealing with a bureaucrat, but when a bureaucrat is a scientist, so the bureaucrat then says, well, I'm the scientist. What the heck do you guys know about it? There's an ascendancy and a power given by that. And I think it's very frightening when you've got bureaucrats doing science, because their whole political agenda comes into it, and that's what we've seen happening. And so those are some of my comments about what we've talked about so far.
Very good comments, Dr. Ball. And I've already been told by some that what you said, it's airplanes flying much higher than what it was 25, 30, 40 years ago, and therefore the contrails are not like they used to be. That's the explanation I've been given by some, and that may be what comes to me from the government as well, if they're not being totally forthright. I don't know. But
yeah. Sorry, just to interrupt for a second, Bill, on that point, then that raises another concern, because if you exhaust the gases into the troposphere, the gases are so much more plentiful that the exhaust from the airplane is virtually nothing in that total mass of the atmosphere. But the stratosphere, the gases are so much thinner. So when you start putting more water vapor in the stratosphere or other gases, then the problems are quite different. And one of the things that there's a form of cloud called a noctilucent cloud, which literally stands for night light. Nocti and lucent is light.
Uh-huh.
We know that there's been quite a significant increase in that type of cloud, and of course that has implications for the global climate. And so I've been raising questions about this. We can say the contrails are different, but then that leads to the next question. Okay, well, what are the implications of that? And so even though they might say, well, this explains your concern about contrails, say, yeah, but no, that raises another concern for me.
Yeah, they'll say that this answers your concern about chemtrails.
Right.
But, no, I agree. And in response to your question about what can we do about the power of the bureaucracy, I think what needs to happen eventually is that we have far more input from the people. In other words, we have more direct democracy from what we see it today, because basically in BC, in every other province and in the country, we elect a premier and a group of politicians with him to form the government, but basically the premier or the prime minister is the dictator, because he sets the rules, he brings forth the legislation, he determines what's allowed and what's not allowed. So there's very little democracy in the system. And the bureaucracy tends to like it that way, because they don't have to work with a whole lot of politicians. They basically work with one or a few. And it's so in the U.S. as well, particularly as of late. We've seen them ignore and forget about the Constitution, and we see things happening that even for someone up here in Canada is strange, unusual, and we're asking the question as well, what's going on in the great USA?
That's right.
Okay, Bill, that raises an issue for me that I've been talking about for a long, long time. Federal governments, which, and of course, they just keep growing and growing. The governments grow and the bureaucracies grow with them, and the bureaucracies feed the growth of the government and so on. And in the original idea, certainly all Western societies anyway, that the federal government's only role was defense, to protect the country.
Yeah.
All right, and now we look at what's happened, and we look at Canada or the U.S., the growth of the federal government is where the problem really is. And I remember years ago when Susan Thompson was mayor in Winnipeg, and I participated in seminars with her, which were very valuable for the citizens. But Bill Carroll, who was the comptroller of the city, said, look, if you were to sit down, and this applies to the U.S. or Canada, if you were to sit down as a citizen and write a check for the federal government and for the provincial government and the municipal government, he said you write 32 to 34% for the federal government, 18 to 19% for the provincial, and 9% for the municipal. But which of those agencies gives you the most service? Which one is there for you every single day with the things that are directly important to your life? And the answer is, of course, the municipal.
That's right.
And I think that one of the things that we've got to work for is to turn that whole thing upside down, so that we've got 9% going to the federal government, 18 to 19% for the province, and then 34% for the municipality. So
I'm with you. That's great.
Right. And then the people, if 34% of their money is going to the municipal, they're going to get much more involved in how that money is spent, and of course because they'll see it directly affecting them.
Absolutely.
Well, you guys are both. Let me step in. You guys are both preaching to the choir, obviously, on that one. And Bill, you mentioned something really interesting: the power to the people. And Bill, ideally, we the people, tell government what to do, not the other way around. And I always say in my other programs, our forefathers would be shooting by now, because these seemingly, you just talked about the United States and the Constitution, and we know these out of control sort of rogue mafia style governments. They seem to do whatever they want. Who cares if the people don't know? As in the cases of what they're spraying. It seems that they don't care. There's zero accountability. I mean, who gave these guys permission to play God? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, and it's getting worse, because I can recall when I started in politics, and that's now going back 40 years or so. When I started in politics, the pay was all right, but it was relatively modest. Today, politicians receive pretty big pay, lots of benefits, and good pensions. So therefore, there is a tendency for the politicians to perhaps not be as outspoken on issues for fear it might cost them their position within the political party that they represent. So it's very different from what it used to be, and I think it's come about in part too because of the bureaucracy again, where they're recommending and suggesting that politicians ought to be getting more pay, more benefits, bigger pensions, because they know well that this is not an unpopular argument to present, and it also means they will get a whole lot more pay too. So the cost of government is so enormous, and people are really fighting more to stay in there for the benefit of what it is they've been getting by way of indemnities and benefits and pensions than what it is to represent the people and the voice of the people.
Well, it's been said that. Go ahead, Tim. Weigh in on that.
No, I was going to say, Bill, is it fair to say that we need to be very leery about anybody that wants to go into politics these days? Because I remember working with Peter Newman, the Maclean's editor, and he told me one time, he said, there's only two kinds of politicians: those that say I've got some ideas that can help the country, and those that say I've got some ideas that can help myself. And he said all that changes through time is the percentage, but he said in the modern era, the percentage that say I've got some ideas that can help the country has got down to almost nothing, and that's the problem. And so how do we make these people accountable? And I think part of it is, of course, once you're in Ottawa, you never have to confront your constituents. Whereas if you're municipal, you're out on the street facing them every day.
Oh, yeah. No, you're saying, wonderful. I like what you're saying, and I like the way you're saying it, and it's just a matter of how do we get around it. I wrote a book called HST and the People for Democracy, and it goes through much of what we've been talking about. As a matter of fact, some have labeled it as a good how-to book in order to address some of the issues that we're now talking of. So, it's you're right. How do we know who it is we elect? I say somehow we have to institute far more direct democracy. I think perhaps not not exactly as the Swiss model, but something, a hybrid Swiss model. And how do we get that? I don't know. But you're right on. Municipal governments is where the power ought to be, or at least that's where the influence is most effective.
Yeah.
So it's been said, I want to just jump in because we were talking earlier about geoengineering. I mean, Bill, it's been said there's a lot of social engineering and manipulation going on by the globalists, funded by such foundations as the Rockefellers, Ford, Carnegie. They're monkeying around with our air, our food, our water. What's your take on that?
Well, again, I agree, and that's what I say in my letter to the governments. That there's an example. You know, these foundations have been rather involved, not for the good of the people as much as for the good of themselves, I guess, and perhaps to foster some of the issues that they want to see fostered and promoted and implemented. Yeah. How do we deal with that? I don't know. I'm sorry that I don't have all the answers either, but I do go back to what I said earlier. Somehow we need to get more people involved, and it's programs like this that are not big media or mainline media talking that hopefully will have an effect. The Internet has done great things for us so far, and there's much more it can do and will do.
Well, let's listen. I want to jump on a quick break here, guys, a 3-minute break. Okay. And while we go there, we're going to listen to, you guys know documentary film producer, writer, lecturer, G. Edward Griffin. He talks candidly about Chem Trail. So let's listen to that, and we'll join as soon as he's done.
Okay.
I'm very aware of the Chem Trail versus Contrail controversy. And as far as I'm concerned, it's an open and shut case. I have been watching the development of jet travel from its very beginning. I used to live near the Los Angeles airport. Remember when the first jets came in and landed, bang, they made a big noise. We never heard a noise like that before. And we used to go down and sit at the end of the runway and watch these jets come in and take off because it was a novel experience. I've been watching jets all my life. When I know about jet contrails, I've watched them. They're vaporized moisture, ice crystals, and they get out there in the atmosphere, and then they effervesce and evaporate and then disappear, and you can see them. The plane moves along, and the little white trail follows right behind it, and usually about 10 or 20 lengths of the plane or thereabouts, and then it's gone. And you can still see them that way, by the way, once in a while. So there goes a contrail. These other things we're talking about are not at all the same phenomena at all. These planes go by, and they billow out this white smoke, and it covers the sky from horizon to horizon. It doesn't dissipate at all. And they crisscross each other, and you see this thing cover the sky and turn it milky, and then people start having trouble breathing, and then you hear stories about the aluminum and barium deposits that they're picking up and the residue. And you put it all together, and I don't see how anybody who's got their eyes open and their mind open can come to any other conclusion but that somebody is spending a lot of money and effort to spray the planet. The question is why? I know that whenever it's finally discovered, and it will be, the people who are doing it will undoubtedly say, oh, well, we did it for you folks. It's for the greater good of the greater number. Mm-hmm. It's for the society. It's probably to prevent global warming, or maybe it's to inoculate people against some kind of a dreaded biological attack. We can't go around shooting everybody in the arm, but we can spray them and save their lives. You see how good we are? We're doing it for the benefit of society. I know they're going to, whatever it is, they're going to say it was for your good or mine. Surely when it finally comes out what is being done, they will try to defend it as though it was some kind of a public benefit being done. It's for you folks. It's for the benefit of society and mankind and all of that nonsense.
So what did you think of that clip?
Yeah, that's very good.
Well, again, Yeah, it's a good clip, but again, be careful, because just to give you one example, and in the early days, and Bill would remember this with the nuclear explosions in the atmosphere, and the claims of the fallout of strontium-90 showing up in the milk, and all of the fears that were generated over that. Well, it turns out that it was simply not true, that the strontium-90 wasn't in the milk. And this is part of the difficulty, that where you've got these people doing things without being accountable for it, you've also got people making claims that when you really push them, they can't justify it. And a guy by the name of Aaron Vidalski, who was a political science professor at a graduate class that talked about these things, about policies and claims in the public and so on. So he had every student in one course pick an environmental issue and go out and try and track down, where did it start? Is there any validity to this? And they found there was no validity to any of them. And he called the book, But Is It True? And, of course, one of the classic things that started so much of this was Rachel Carson's claim about DDT and it destroying birds' eggs. Well, it turns out there was never any evidence of that. And of course, what's happened is they banned DDT to the point now where more people are dying of malaria in Africa than from AIDS. And so I'm not saying that there aren't problems, but again, there's a lot of misdirection and misinformation on both sides of the issue, and that's why I was warning, being a little cautious. But in a larger sense, Bill and Sheila, society moves by paradigm shifts. That is, we have a certain way of thinking and looking at the world, and then somebody comes along and says, "Hey, we need to rechange this or rethink this." I can mention very recently. One, of course, was feminism, which dramatically shifted and was very necessary. There are still a lot of changes necessary, but women started to say, "Well, how far do we go with this? How far do we take this new paradigm?" And what always happens with a new paradigm is there are people that grab it and see the political opportunities in it and take off running. And we saw the extreme feminists. And then there's those that say, "No, I'm not going to change at all," at both ends of the spectrum. But the majority in the middle are saying, "Well, yeah, there's some good ideas there, but how far do I go?" Well, the role of the extremist is to define the limits for everyone else. And so when the bra burners came out, then the majority of women say, "No, sorry, and I need that instrument." And so the extremists had defined a limit. Now, what we're talking about here, of course, is the paradigm shift of environmentalism, which came in during Bill's career and my career, and we saw how it changed politics. But, of course, it became, for those extremists leading the charge, the extreme environmentalists who basically want to get rid of all the people on the planet, it became two things. It became the moral high ground. Oh, you don't listen to me. You don't care about the planet. You don't care about the future of the children. But it also became a religion, because science had effectively got rid of religion, and the young people didn't have any moral values to live by, and environmentalism became that replacement. Well, now what's happening is that there's extremism of claims going on about, "Oh, we're hurting the environment this way, you're doing that and doing the other." And this is why my comments earlier about we need to be very careful that we've got the facts. That doesn't mean to say you can't ask questions, but it's different asking a question than saying, "Look, I know for certain," or "Yeah, this is going on," or "There's aluminum falling out of the sky.
But I want to jump in here, Tim, because anybody can Google this. It's a documentary called "What in the World Are They Spraying?" Excellent documentary. What concerns me is you're talking about asking questions. If you go to that end of that video, these guys tried asking questions to all these politicians, and they just get the blank stare, the deer in headlights, the shoulders shrugging, don't know what you're talking about, geoengineering, never heard of it. I mean, come on, there is something I mean, these governments are totally untrustworthy.
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I'm talking about the science specifically. So when you say, "Well, there's aluminum fallout from the sky," show me your evidence for that. But it's different when they won't answer the question. They're not answering the questions because they've done something. They've done something without permission, and this is the point that Bill has been making. And this is why what Bill is pursuing is so properly the right way to do it. Look, I'm asking a question. If you refuse to answer the question, then I'm going to raise a whole lot more questions about what are you doing. It's the old biblical thing. The devil's work is done in the darkness.
Sure. Well, that's a perfect segue to my. That's a perfect segue to my other question to Bill, which was, Bill, in the event that environment comes back and all these guys come back and say, we don't know what you're talking about, there's nothing going on, what are you prepared to do at that point if you're just not getting the questions answered that you want?
Well, it's difficult to say because I don't know what sort of answer I might get. If I get an answer, which I expect and probably will get, hopefully without too much of a runaround, then I'll have to analyze what the answer, if it's sufficiently detailed and explains what it is they have and know about all of this, even if they come back and say, we know nothing, it's not happening, this is what we believe it to be, this is what the evidence we have, I'm happy with that. If they can somehow show that nothing's happening, that everything's all right, and we're not being poisoned with aluminum and strontium and barium, I'll be happy with that. That's why the whole thing that I presented to government, provincially, federally, and municipally, was in the form of a question rather than a statement of fact, the form of a question. So, I'm happy with that. But what will I do? I don't know until I get the answer. Not knowing what the answer will be, I can't comment on that.
Right, exactly. I mean, hypothetically, I'm just saying, I guess you have a little bit of a preparation for each thing. I mean, but I want to switch gears a little bit. I know your time is limited. We only have an hour show, and I want you to talk about smart meters. I mean, there's been many studies out. There's dangerous adverse health effects. That's irrefutable about smart meters. But what's your take on that, Bill? But what I want to look at is the other side of the coin. All this spying and tracking and data mining of everyone and their activities. Weigh in on both those, both the health effects and all this spying, tracking, data mining, etc.
Well, again, I don't know what the health effects. But what scares me is that I don't think BC Hydro knows what the health effects. At least they've not come out and shown us that there are no harmful effects from the smart meters. That's the one thing. Initially, I was opposed because I saw government through BC Hydro, doing things exactly as they had done it with the HST. They just brought it in, they signed all the documents, they committed the money, went ahead, and then came to the people and said, this is what we've done. I don't think that's good enough when you're spending $1 billion and telling people there's not enough money for health care. So that was my initial opposition. Then when it became known that I was opposed, of course, I started to get all of this information about invasion of privacy, and I'm told that eventually all of our implements in the kitchen or wherever will have a little chip that tells the smart meter when it's on, off, or what's happening. Yeah, that's sort of going beyond. Also, I guess, if BC Hydro can find out all of this information from us through the smart meter, there might be some smart hackers out there that can get a lot of that information as well and misuse it. So that's a concern. The health issue is what most people are talking about, but I don't know just what the health effects. They say that radioactive waves or electromagnetic radio waves are dangerous. Just how dangerous, how it'll affect me, I don't know. But I was quite happy with my analog meter. I still have my analog meter, and I didn't know why they had to spend $1 billion on smart meters, and I'm still not satisfied that I've been told or given any answers.
I think the answer, and of course, in BC, through the Campbell government, they set up the Climate Action Committee, which was, by the way, the primary providers of information, scientific information on that, were members of the IPCC from the University of Victoria. And, of course, they convinced that government that, global warming is proven, the science is settled, we've got to act. And of course, it involved putting in the smart meters. because ultimately they want to be able to say, well, you're using too much energy, so we know that from your smart meter, and therefore we're going to shut you down. Well, this is what was going on in the U.S. with the EPA, where they got the Supreme Court to bypass the Congress by saying, yeah, the EPA legislatively has the right to control CO2 as a harmful substance. And so they had a list of 13,000 major producers of CO2 in the U.S., where the bureaucrat, just on their say-so, could go in and say, you're producing too much CO2, therefore we're going to shut you down. So it really was the ultimate control. Now, I saw this with the ozone issue. This was another one. CFCs, there was never any evidence that CFCs were affecting ozone, and I appeared before the parliamentary committee on this. Well, they appointed an ozone controller in Manitoba, and he went around the province bragging about how he could take a farmer to court and just on his word say that the farmer was using CFCs and then fine him $200,000 and have a 20-year jail sentence. So this is what the information isn't the problem. It's who has the information and then the potential for its use of controlling people's lives. And that's what scares me about the smart meter and how it was brought in through that Climate Action Committee. And they brought in the Climate Action Plan, and it's available on the Internet. You can pull it down and read it for yourself. And I was over on Main Island, and suddenly these government people showed up and said, you know, we're even looking at banning cars on your island because we want to reduce the carbon footprint of the island, just dictating to them because of this Climate Action Plan. And so that's really what it's all about, is control.
It's control, yeah.
Yep.
Well, environmentalism really is a new religion. I mean, we just heard yesterday that there's Canada's commitment to earth worship, and that's staggering. I mean, it is one of the most powerful religions in the Western world, environmentalism. It seems to be the kind of religion of choice for urban atheists, you know, a religion where God is replaced with nature. God help you if you step on a rock. My God, Gaia's holy warrior, High Priest Al Gore, look at his new book, talks all about that, you know, and they're saying that humans are the blight of the earth and they're a cancer, and we should just rid well, look at Earth First there. Tim, you know that quote. He wants to rid everybody on the planet. I mean, that's staggering.
But of course, that underlies everything that we've been talking about here today. And if you go back, and you and I have talked about this, Sheila, is that the frightening word that they use all the time, or the word that frightens people, is overpopulation. There are too many people on the planet. The comment was made today. I heard somebody talking about it. The world isn't overpopulated by any stretch of the imagination. And not only that, but we know when development occurs and an economy improves and people have jobs and income, then the birth rate goes down and the population declines. So the natural control of population is in development, not in stopping development, which is what the environmentalists want to do. But there's an underlying anti-humanity in the whole in the extreme environmentalist movement.
Absolutely.
Which we've talked about. Yeah.
So, Bill, switching gears a little bit, tell listeners about your new book. It just came out 2 months ago. Again, you mentioned the title, HST and the People for Democracy. Came out, about 2 months ago. What you learned in sort of killing that dreaded, awful HST, and what's important for the people of BC to take away from not only your learning experience in all of this, but, you know, what are your general thoughts?
Well, I've written a few books. And I'm not a writer, and I'm certainly not a computer expert. I have trouble with my computer all of the time. But anyway, I've written a few books, and the last was the HST book, and I self-published, which might have been a mistake, because if you self-publish, you've also got to try and get distribution, and that in itself can be a horrendous problem.
Sure.
But, so I have a website. It's called www.hstbook.com, hstbook.com. And the book basically explains exactly how we became involved, why we became involved, what we did once involved, how all of the people joined in, the enormous work that followed from all of that, As a matter of fact, for a time, my life was badly affected by it because we had these petition sheets coming back from every constituency in the province, and the media was wanting to find out where those sheets all went to, and we didn't want to say because if it became known where they were, we would only need to lose one bundle of petition sheets or one box, and the whole thing was over, because we had to get 10% of all the voters signing the petition in every one of the 85 constituencies. We targeted 15. We got more than 15. We did very well. But we could easily, and I was very worried many a day when we were counting these sheets up in my recreation room, because Lillian had to count over 100,000 sheets and check them out and bundle them and put them so that we could present them to Elections BC. There were times when we were very worried. We didn't want to have company over. We didn't want to even have relations over for fear somebody would see it, get out there and talk about it, and then our home wouldn't be that safe. So it's an interesting book. It tells all the stuff that a whole lot of people probably never realized happened. And if I didn't put it to a book, which is why I had to self-publish, if I didn't put it to a book 5, 6, 7, or 8 years from now, people would have forgotten. So I wanted to get it in writing so that it's there historically forevermore. This a successful petition affecting a tax in a governmental jurisdiction had never been done. This was a first in the British Commonwealth of Nations. It had never happened before. So it was a tremendous achievement by a whole lot of people all over the province. It's a good book. It's a great book.
Just a quick comment, because this information is of value to the Americans, because there's talk down there about a value-added tax. And implementation.
Yeah, it would be very helpful for them, and they have a process for referendum which is probably a lot more effective than ours. The book is I sell it for $20, including GST, including postage, including wrapping. So if somebody wants to order a book, it's about 180 pages. It's a good book. We'll send it out, $20, everything included, delivered to their door. And they can send their order. They can go to the website and order it and use PayPal, or they can send the money to Box 1, Delta, BC. Bill Vander Zalm or HST Book, Box 1, Delta, BC, V4K 3N5. V4K 3N5.
What is your sense now that the HST, now that, it's eroded, you killed it, but now the fact that they're screaming and ranting, how much millions, of, if not $1 billion, to switch it back to the old system. I mean, these guys put it in, no consultation. They just illegally thwarted in that tax, and they wanted us to take it and like it. And then now they're crying that, it's a huge burden to the taxpayers to switch it back. What is your thoughts on that, Bill?
Well, they did spend a lot of money. We spent a little less than $250,000, which we collected from a whole lot of people by people donating $10, $20, $50. So we spent less than $250,000 during that whole time. The government and big business probably spent in the order of about $25 million. They had all of those stickman ads, and so they spent a lot of money. And obviously, big business was paying for a good part of it. I often use the example of the people that built the Port Mann Bridge. They had an agreement of how much they would build the bridge for. It was all spelled out in a whole lot of documentation. And suddenly they're getting the HST or their PST back, and they were getting the GST back anyway, but now they're getting their PST back as well. It was probably, we're guessing again, a $40 million windfall for them. Or I use the example of General Electric building the run-of-the-river projects. They had a number of those on the go. Suddenly they had their agreements as to how much they would get from BC Hydro per kilowatt hour, and suddenly they're getting the PST back on all the equipment or material they're buying to install these run-of-the-river projects. So for a lot of those people, it was a bit of a windfall. They didn't mind financing or helping finance with the government an advertising campaign against us. It's all in the book.
Yeah. Sheila, can I jump in with just a last little idea for Bill here at the end?
You bet.
I've been talking with a group in England because we've already discussed the internet and, of course, social media, which is how the young people are being in touch with the world, and much more personally in touch with the world than ever in our time. But whether we're very close to the point where we could effectively have true participatory democracy. Every citizen now has an insurance number or a government number assigned to them, and what we could do is that the citizens vote on which issues they want to have votes on. So each week or each month there's a list of issues that need decisions from the citizens on, and then everybody has their vote. And even if it's only a poll on what the people think, instead of having Gallup with 1,000 people, you could have social media with 2 billion people saying what their view is on it. So the potential for true participatory democracy is maybe within the electronics and the internet that's already out there.
Right.
Sheila, I think we're going to get Dr. Tim Ball very involved here. He's got some great ideas. We've got to keep him busy.
Oh, yeah, we will. Don't worry. And, Bill, we got about 2 minutes to wrap up, and I wanted to really thank you for coming on. I really think it speaks volumes, Bill, when there is someone like you that is, actively engaging in the problems of the people and the things that, oftentimes we often say we feel like we have no voice. And I think when somebody goes after things like you do, I mean, you've been the premier of a province, you've been in politics a long time, you've certainly had your thumb in the pulse of what's been going on in BC for many, many years, as has Tim, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of interesting things over the last few decades. But, we'd love to have you come back and give us updates on all these things that are going on, such as, what you end up finding out, of course, with the Chem Trail issue. We really appreciate your time, and again, you've just done some wonderful things.
Sheila.
And there's so many
Thank you,
people
Sheila.
emailed us just to let you know, Bill, that they just absolutely were so thrilled with your killing the HST, because that Gordon Campbell, him and I are going to have a boxing match one day if I can ever.
He did
But
all
anyway,
right, you know where he's at now. But I appreciate being on with you, Sheila. Thank you, Dr. Tim. And,
you're welcome.
It's been very helpful, and there's a great deal of satisfaction in getting involved with what you believe to be the right thing. So I'm being rewarded that way. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I think, Bill, there's another important point here, and one of the things that you mentioned about your lack of facility with computers. Nowadays, you say, if you don't know computers, you have nothing to add. It's a fatal mistake. We're ignoring experience, and what you're bringing to the table here is that vast experience, and we need to, it's like with the Aboriginal communities, where they now got posters out saying, listen to the elders, because they're not listening to the elders anymore, and I think what you're contributing here is very good evidence of why we've got to do that in all our communities.
Thank you both very, very much.
Well, we'll be in touch, and we support you 100%, and we'll talk to you soon for updates.
We'll keep in
thank
touch.
you.
Right.
So
thank
I want
to,
again, thank you so much. And I want to thank everybody for listening to the Weekend Vigilante. Jump on our show tomorrow, The Antidote. It's 4:30 Pacific Standard Time. Stay tuned for the Proof Negative show. He's always got excellent topics and great guests, and we thank you for tuning in today.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
I don't know. I just don't know when exactly.
I certainly did not know anything.
There was no knowledge here at the White House.
This is a globally orchestrated meltdown to reshape the world into complete totalitarian global governance. Really, the end game here is the Luciferian sinister eugenics plan.
It's time to kick ass and chew bubble gum. I'm all out of gum.
You let one ant stand up to us, then they all might stand up.
Now is the time.
The problem is that we're not being told.
The Weekend Vigilante Show with Sheila Zilinsky.